Donc, bon après-midi à tous et à toutes. Merci beaucoup d'être présents. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for being here. My name is Seira Fortin-Suzuki. It is my pleasure to present you my presentation today titled Shedding Light on the R of TPSR, an analysis of the conceptual basis of TPSR within seeing through a humanistic lens in a theory of responsibility. Those of you who were fortunate enough to know Don Hellison can take a wild guess and think that this might not have been Don's favorite conference. Him being so anchored in practice, and my talk being very much at the other end of the spectrum of theory and practice. Nevertheless, I think that we would both have agreed that this is important work, to anchor TPSR in some kind of theoretical way, and that it can help TPSR grow as well, to be able to have some theoretical roots so we can anchor TPSR better. I did try to do this talk without reading off of my notes. Unfortunately, I was not able to, so I will be reading off of them, and since I don't have a podium, I will be sitting down as well. I hope you're not offended by this, and I really don't mean no disrespect, but I think it'll be just better for me to do this talk. So, and I will try to be as interactive as I can be, even though I'm reading off. All right, so without further ado, let's get to it. I won't be presenting the TPSR model since Sylvie did a very good job with this in the opening talk. I do want to come back on a few points though. TPSR at its core is a model that really did spawn from practice with the kids, the well-being of the kids really being at the heart of Don Hellison's priority. And along with studies and tools that have been developed over the years, the model did provide very clear indicators of what responsibility can look like with the 5 levels that Sylvie mentioned, and also how responsibility can be fostered through the TPSR model with, for example, the tool for assessing responsibility-based education, the 9 teaching practices that Sylvie mentioned as well. A question though that kept being brought up when I started to work with TPSR back in 2013 was, what are the conceptual underpinnings of TPSR? When we talk about responsibility in TPSR, what are we really talking about beyond the 5 levels? Or those 5 levels, what are the references? What can we read theoretically to anchor this model? The model itself does not present its theoretical roots, nor does it intend to. It's really meant to be spawned from practice. And few studies have analyzed the conceptual underpinnings of the construct of responsibility as viewed in the model. And so, starting in our master's degree back in 2014 or 13, we aimed to narrow that gap. The goal of this presentation are twofold. First of all, we want to present the humanistic conceptualization of responsibility. And then, in second, to tie in responsibility as viewed in TPSR to our conceptualization. So for now, we will put aside the TPSR model, just zoom out quite a lot and have a look at what responsibility means in general, not just in the P, not in U, just responsibility as a whole for everyone. And then we'll circle back around at the end and come back to the TPSR. All right, so what is responsibility? What does being responsible mean? It can mean a lot of things. We can refer to imputability, or being guilty of something. I am responsible for spilling my coffee on my colleague's laptop. It can mean to be in charge of something. I am responsible for organizing this symposium, for example. Or it can refer to someone who makes wise, informed, and responsible choices. So contrary to its very widespread use of responsibility in modern society, responsibility is a construct with very few clear and agreed upon definitions. This is especially true when trying to describe responsibility through the choices we make. So the last example that I gave. what are the criteria for being considered a responsible human being? If we were to do a tour of just us, 15, 20 people, I am convinced that we would get a very diverse definition of what it means to be a responsible human being, even though responsibility is most probably something we are all interested in. Some speak in the literature of a conceptual blur around the notion of responsibility, not only in society itself, but in the literature as well. What is clear, though, is that responsibility can be construed both retrospectively and prospectively. The retrospective vision of responsibility has been around for ages. It refers to being imputed for an action to answer for its consequences. For example, I spilled coffee on my colleague's laptop, now I gotta pay for it. Retrospective responsibility. On the other hand, prospective responsibility refers to the ability to foresee the probable consequences of our action and to act based upon an informed judgment. While both are true, we need both retrospective and prospective responsibility. Prospective responsibility adds a very powerful twist to responsibility. Here, it becomes a force which can guide our actions, and it's not limited to answering for them. But if responsibility is to be a guide for our action, then guidelines are required. And there's two questions that needs to be answered. First, towards who and what am I responsible? Envers qui et quoi suis-je responsable? And second, before whom or in front of whom am I responsible? Devant qui ou quoi suis-je responsable? To answer these two questions, which are pivotal, I present you a conceptualization of responsibility born of a theoretical research that I did in my master's degree. Which it's this slide. Sorry about that. All right, here. So in this theoretical research, we ended up, after reading through a few hundred texts that had responsibility, at least in their title and in their abstract, we narrowed down a few texts, mainly in the domain of philosophy, of scholars who reflected about what responsibility really means. The authors here are mostly from French, German, and English, as I said, they are mainly in the domain of philosophy as well. We did start by looking at in the field of education, but the definition of responsibility were either too widespread or too narrow to really do the kind of work that we wanted to do. And so we identified 4 mandatory items, so constructs without which responsibility cannot exist. They are liberty, obligation, causal relation, and the faculty of conscience. I will guide you through this diagram and highlight how these 4 constructs interact with each other to lead to responsibility. First off, in the top left, liberty. Here, liberty is understood as the idea of natural liberty, where humans can act according to their free will, irrespective of any kind of laws, morals, and norms that are created by society. I have a power of choice. For better or worse, I can choose to abide to or to break the laws and norms of society. In short, our liberties are virtually infinite in the setting that we are, at least in the Occidental world. If we move over to obligation to the right, we find that we have very few absolute obligations as human beings. In order to survive, I have to eat, drink, sleep. Not much else, right? Or so we could argue, but those are very basic obligations. Of course, we each take a plethora of social and moral obligations without which society would not be able to work. But every culture, every micro-society, and even every individual each have their own set of obligations and unique set of obligations that they accept and that they take for themselves. The human race is very far from an agreement of what social and moral obligations should look like. And of course, we're not robots, so this does not have to be a goal. If we move over now to the middle box, causal relation, donc le pouvoir causal, it links my actions to the other. And just to take a moment to clarify the notion of the other, the capital A for autre, which is English for other, so you can picture other with the capital O as well, is understood as the living in general. So human or otherwise, myself included. So I am part of this other we are talking about. From now on, when I speak about the other or the others, plural, consider that I am also referring to the self. So being responsible towards the other means being responsible towards oneself, the community, the fauna, the environment, and so on. The object of my responsibility is the others, which my action can impact, and the causal relation in between is what links my action to the other. And lastly, our faculty of conscience of what precedes, so our liberties, our obligation, the causal relation, is the last ingredient that we need in order for responsibility to exist. It is because I can be conscious of my choices and from how it can impact the other that I can be responsible. For example, this marks us adults as having a greater responsibility for our choices compared to young children who do not yet grasp all the consequences of their actions. So to summarize, responsibility is born at the confluence between liberty and obligation. Liberty and obligation lead to choices, and it is by these choices that we make that our responsibility will be judged. Causal relation links our action to the other, which is the object of my responsibility, and our faculty of conscience sets apart responsibility and simple impunity. So how does this conceptualization help us answer the two questions that we asked before? The first question was, who and what am I responsible towards? The answer lies within the causal relation that ties us to whom and what our action affects. Simply put, I am responsible towards the other, affected by the consequences of my action. I have the power to affect someone. If I have the power to affect someone, rather, then I have a responsibility towards that person. And the greater my power is, the greater my responsibility. Since I have a great power over myself, all the decisions that I make irrevocably affect myself. I have a greater power, greater responsibility towards myself. And this transcends the idea of doing no harm and includes the idea of becoming a force for positive change. So it's not just about, not being detrimental to one's well-being, but to be very much a leader in taking a role, positive role to help others grow. While considering and respecting my own personal needs, so we're not talking about abnegation, for example, it is my responsibility to better the well-being of my surroundings. The main issue, though, is this. So who are the other towards whom I deem myself responsible? Simply put, who do I care about? Myself, my family, my friends, acquaintances, strangers. We could add animals, the planet, etc. The whole realm of the living, basically. Of course, it is only natural that we care more deeply towards our inner circle. But the challenge and the imperative is to nevertheless broaden the scope of who we care for and try to expand it towards the ones that we might not care about or care for to begin with. We need to do so by finding an equilibrium in the relative importance we give to ourselves, to our close social circle, to the community, the environment, and so on. For some, though, maybe the ones that might be a bit too selfless, the challenge may be to give more importance to their own selves. So to not forget that the self here, we have a responsibility towards ourselves too. Since, so I already mentioned that, the door is wide open here, of course, to talk about racism, sexism, other forms of discrimination, but given the time that we have, I will restrain myself and just say that such behavior, of course, go against the conceptualization of responsibility, as we understand. The second question was, before whom am I responsible? What form of authority do I answer to, consciously or unconsciously? And what are the moral and social obligations that such an authority puts forward? This question today has never been so hard to answer. We live in a world with fewer and fewer absolute markers of what is right and wrong, of what people can or cannot do. Let it be clear that I absolutely believe that this increased freedom of choice is positive, and it helped, for example, better the civic rights, although it's far from being perfect, towards women, people of color, LGBTQ, just to give a few examples. But as we renounce our very restrictive ideas that might have existed a few decades back of what is right and wrong, and move towards a diverse society in which everyone is entitled to live their lives the way they want, one imperative must not be sacrificed. And that imperative is the well-being of the other. So it is before an ethos, une éthique, with at its heart the well-being of the other, which includes the self again, that I am responsible. No matter how we justify it, it is in the name of this well-being that I am responsible. Unfortunately, when we watch the news, example of actions that we deem harmful towards any given demographic are legion. And this is true no matter the political point of view that you are, far left, far right, you'll find that no, people do not effectively work with, or that's what I think, with the well-being of the others in mind. I might be naive, but I believe that very few individuals are ill-intended and purposefully seek to harm others. The issue is more so that the idea of what is good, the idea of one's well-being is relative and often not shared and agreed upon from one individual to another. Indeed, issues arise when representations of what the well-being of others means are not shared and agreed upon from one to another. So how do we make good choices? Ones that are good for everyone. We may never have, of course, the absolute answer because it's one of the probably most complicated question that we could ask ourselves. But a good start would be through critical and informed reflection. Ones that are marked with respect, compassion, and about the impacts of our action on the other. But where could we develop such life skills? I would say education, and education. Along with family, that is, what better institution can uphold this task to educate truly responsible citizens? So I found this quote to be very powerful as it wraps up the idea that has been said so far. As liberty is cemented as a core value of our society, one that aims to be just and united, responsibility should act to strengthen liberty and to structure it. As a bridge linking liberty to obligation, responsibility should act as a watchdog keeping in check our ever-increasing liberties. And I might add individual liberty as well. In short, being responsible boils down to this: standing before my liberties, before my seemingly endless amount of choices that are before me. To the best of my abilities, my actions should be informed by self-given obligations that are based on a very broad representation of who the other that I care for is, and two, that strive to improve the well-being of the other. So now that we've done a very big zoom out and went to a very general level of what responsibility is, let's circle back and come back to the TPSR and see how the conceptualization that I presented can help foster the conceptual underpinnings of the TPSR. So does it align with the conceptualization? Yes, we argue. And especially in acknowledging the personal side and the social side of responsibility, TPSR is in sync with the notion of the other that we described above. I have a great responsibility towards myself, and I have a great responsibility towards the others that surround me. Both the TPSR and the conceptualization advocate for similar sets of value necessary for being responsible, such as respect, caring, open-mindedness, empathy, self-direction, and so on. More specifically, the personal and social side of responsibility strengthen the underpinning of conceptual responsibility in TPSR. Regarding first the personal side of responsibility, we had effort and self-direction as hallmarks of self-development. The model aims to help students develop tools to help make good decisions and to take better controls of their lives. As we saw, it is by the choices we make that our responsibility is judged and qualified. Since only we can be responsible for our own action, developing self-direction and autonomy is key in recognizing that we are responsible towards, and then harnessing and acting upon responsibilities towards the other. Regarding now the social side of responsibility, so we had respect and caring. that are put forward as goals that students should set for themselves. These goals are directly linked to the broad representation of the others that we described, and the importance as well of the well-being of the others. It is notably through respect and caring that one can truly embody responsibility towards the other. Caring for the other also means caring about their development. So as I said, it's not only retrospective. The idea is to really actively contribute to the positive development of the others, embodying and spreading the core values of TPSR. What the model expects of students and of teachers as well regarding respect and caring really harkens back to the well-being of the other in a proactive way that goes far beyond not impairing another's development. As we alluded to previously, with great power comes great responsibility. Both the personal and social side of responsibility developed in TPSR should be transferred in the everyday life, which could help students better understand the need of an equilibrium between the self and the other in many situations. It is undoubtedly one of the greatest strengths of the model, the idea of transfer. The TPSR's ultimate aim is to transfer these goals beyond the gym, and really being about a way of being, a way of living that transcends any specific context. And this holistic approach is coherent with the way we view responsibility as well. Just as we put the well-being of the other front and center as a priority, so does the TPSR. As a conclusion, I would say that TPSR connects harmoniously with the humanistic conceptualization that we presented. On one hand, better understanding the theoretical underpinnings of the model sheds light on the processes through which one can become responsible and how the TPSR model really interacts with these processes. On the other hand, by providing concrete strategies to foster responsibility, TPSR can serve as a catalyst to form a bridge between theory and practice. And in a context in which we value the idea of fostering responsibility, but in which we also struggle to pinpoint specific ways to foster responsibilities, TPSR really stands out as a model that could provide some answers. The work we shared today will help, hopefully, reinforce a model that is already very well established, but from a different angle that seldom studies had explored before. So I believe the theoretical table has been set. I hope everyone is still kind of awake. And I will let now my future presentation, my colleagues will really be more anchored in practice, so you guys can have a look at what TPSR looks like on the field. Thank you very much for your time.